The news of the day today is Hamas is saying that they've approved a new Gaza ceasefire proposal put forth by mediators. The news came today, and Hamas says that they hope Israel will accept it as well. Standing by is host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer. Hal, it's Saturday evening in the U.S. right now as we record this. Has Israel responded to this yet?
Yes, actually they have. They've said no. They're not really interested right now. Now, will that change? Austin, I don't know. You know, we've seen this. It could shift. There are protests on the streets in Israel right now saying you're sacrificing the lives of the hostages. Now, the proposal on the table is not as big as some of the earlier proposals. It would be a series of weeks. I think originally it was estimated about 6 weeks that there would be 5 hostages released during that time period. One of them is an Israeli American that would be released. These are 5 live hostages. I should make that very clear because a number of the 59 hostages that are held are presumably deceased. So, and that is something they also negotiate is release of their remains. But that's what's on the table right now. Now, originally, this was Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy's kind of basic proposal was to do this when the phase 2 negotiations completely broke down. He kind of threw this out there as a sort of an extension on phase 1, if you will, with a smaller release of hostages. It wasn't a complete extension of phase 1. It's a little bit different, but it is similar. And that there would be a ceasefire in effect, and the aid would flow through while this is going on. Right now, the aid is not flowing through. The Israelis are conducting military strikes and taking military action in Gaza, and it's having a pretty profound effect. In fact, it's even starting for the first time to separate, if you will, politically, some of the Palestinian residents from Hamas, and we're seeing demonstrations of that.
So, as you've said, and this is from the Washington Times, they say Hamas accepting this proposal, Israel saying it has made a counter-proposal in, quote, full coordination with the third mediator, the United States. So why is Hamas agreeing to this proposal, Hal? Why is Hamas agreeing to it and Israel is not?
Well, Hamas is looking at Israel is looking at what's going on the ground. You know, part of it is they're seeing demonstrations by Palestinians in Gaza against Hamas. They're kind of wondering about that. The other thing they're also looking at is, you know, while this is going on, they have the forces in place, but they're feeling tremendous strain. You got to remember, they have had military forces, reserves particularly, on act for a very long period of time, and they're just saying, look, are we just kicking this thing down the road? Are we eventually going to have to go in there anyway? And since they're already there, that's a big consideration for them is this kind of a waste of time to just do something like this? Because they're not seeing where that really favors Israel's end state solution. However, during this entire time period, we have seen some interesting things that have happened. For example, the Arab states have pretty much all aligned to say that Hamas will not be governing Gaza when this is all said and done. That's very different than where we were, say, 6 months ago, a year ago. So that's a huge shift. And so they're weighing all of that. And I think they're kind of wondering if there might be a larger sort of popular movement within Gaza to that the citizenry, the residents there are going to force out Hamas. Is there going to be a real political schism? That's something we have not seen. And it's been very frustrating. As horrific as everything's been, the moment there's a ceasefire, you have all the Gaza residents out on the street and chiding the hostages as they're being released. And it's very frustrating for Israel, not just the optics, but it's very frustrating. It's like somehow they're just not getting through to the psychology of the Palestinians that this endless war, if you will, this endless fighting is not in their best interest. And finally, they're starting to see some results in that there seems to be an awakening, if you will, that that Hamas is not what they want in their future. So what you're rather interested to see what occurs. Where is this going to go? And you know, they're looking at the long term, which is how do you get Hamas out? And what's interesting is the protesters are saying the words, Hamas has to go, get Hamas out. And I find that just fascinating, that not just the fact they're protesting, but what they're actually saying in these protests. It's and then the question is, of course, where does Hamas go? That's been a big question out there. I think the only thing I've seen is they said they could go to Sudan, which is in the midst of a massive civil war. I thought that was an interesting idea. But where does Hamas go? And part of this, part of the thing that plays in the background, you got to remember, President Trump put out that proposal, which is to force all of the Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip, and then it would come under U.S. control and be developed into a resort. And there is a certain amount of psychological operations there, which is they're looking at this and saying, okay, the alternatives out there are probably worse than us trying to force Hamas out. And I'm not saying that was the grand scheme of what the U.S. is doing, and certainly what Israel's doing. But you got to remember, we have some very sophisticated players with Israel and the U.S., and they know how to work things. And I think we may be seeing some fruits of their efforts to try and change the mindset of the Palestinians in Gaza.